6 days ago, on November 12th, 2018, we lost the godfather of Marvel. One of the three main architects of the Marvel Universe. There was Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and Steve Ditko. And as of 6 days ago, all three are gone. But I don't mean to be that guy that's talking about things on a down note. I actually want to talk about what Stan Lee did for me, and probably many others, and like what he did for my childhood, what he did for my creativity, my imagination, all the things that he did for me. I just really didn't put into perspective about how much I appreciate the characters he created, the stories he wrote, the characters that he put on page, and really what he's done for pop culture in, say, the last 20 years or so, with all the Marvel movies that have been releasing as of the last 2 decades. My introduction to Stan Lee actually came in this game, SpiderMan on PlayStation 1. And even though I didn't know it at the time, even though he said that he is the co-creator of Spider-Man, I didn't know who Stan Lee was. I mean, I was 5 years old when this game came out. I was 5 years old when this game came out. This was my introduction to not just Spider-Man, but Stan Lee, Marvel as a whole, and it is a pretty good game still. But one of my favorite things about the game, looking back now, and even before Stan Lee's death, is actually the opening narration.
Welcome, true believers and newcomers alike. Spider-Man co-creator Stan Lee here. Once again, we find our hero Peter Parker, better known around the world as the Amazing Spider-Man, in a heap of trouble. But this is just the beginning, Spidey fans. So get ready for a true superhero action thriller, packed to the brim with thrills and chills, twists and turns, more supervillains than you can shake a web at, and of course, non-stop web-slinging, wall-crawling action.
I had no idea that this character that Stan Lee created would have such a big impact on my life until much, much later, whenever I grew older. I didn't really know much about Marvel as a whole. I only knew a lot about Spider-Man because of the 90s series that came out, and Spider-Man the New Animated Series, which came out a year after the Raimi movies, and again, not to mention the Sam Raimi movies, which to this day I still quote with my friends. Spider-Man was actually my very first superhero. He still is my favorite superhero of all time, and potentially my favorite fictional character of all time. But I didn't really start reading Marvel comics until a year after Iron Man 1 came out. That's whenever I started getting kind of an interest. So I started from the beginning with a majority of the comics that Stan Lee wrote whenever they were first starting out. Starting with the Amazing Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy number 15, all the way to around issue 170. I've been on and off on the Amazing Spider-Man series. Sometimes you just can't find time to read. I read a few of the Iron Man comics, like Demon in a Bottle. Demon in a Bottle. I also read some of the original Hulk comics and about a few issues of Daredevil. But Spider-Man was my main hook. I didn't even know who the Avengers were until 2011, so whenever I look back at that post-credits scene from Iron Man 1, I knew that that was Nick Fury because I had been reading Ultimate Spider-Man. I knew who that was, but I had no idea who the Avengers were. I hadn't gotten deep enough into Ultimate Spider-Man to where they were talking about the Avengers, or the Ultimates anyway, as they were named in that universe, Ultimates. It's just, I didn't like, outside of the characters that were adapted into movies, I didn't know who the Avengers were until about a year before their movie came out, and I was excited to see that movie. Yeah, it's pretty much an epitome of all Stan Lee's work. It was a loose adaptation of Avengers number 1, where it was Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, Ant-Man and Wasp versus Loki. We didn't get that exact lineup in the movie, but hey, whatever pays tribute to that, tribute, homage, respect to the first Avengers comic, that's good enough for me. So my introduction to Stan Lee and Marvel as a whole started with SpiderMan. It kind of just went from there as the Marvel movies started coming out. And by the end of Phase 1, I was actually familiar with the majority of the Marvel characters. What Stan Lee means to me is kind of like that grandfather that teaches you a lot of lessons. With great power, there must always come great responsibility. Like, stand up for what you think is right. Doing the right thing, that kind of thing. Stan Lee is one of my biggest inspirations, especially as of the last few years since I've gotten more and more familiar with his works. He sparks my creativity, he sparks many, many things within inside me, my imagination. He captures my attention. He's everything that I would love to strive for as a writer, somebody that makes an impact, somebody that teaches a lesson while also telling a great story. Just a lot of things, a lot of magic occurs whenever you're reading a story of his. And even though he may not have changed his characters throughout his runs on each of the characters that he's created, he did create them in the first place, despite the fact that their changes and character evolutions didn't occur until well after he stopped writing them. But he did create some of the more iconic storylines within some of the characters that he made. And after all, he is the one that brought Captain America back from the ice and put him in the Avengers. While I and others are very saddened that Mr. Lee's gone, he did leave a massive legacy behind that we won't forget and we won't let future generations neglect. I hope that he's somewhere living in peace with his wife Joan. I'm Lino Maras of the MMCA Productions crew, and to all you true believers and newcomers alike, Excelsior.